Oh, I'm just going to.
Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz. This is episode 4. Today, joining us is Andy Duncan. He is the host of the Libertarian UK podcast, and he just gave you a big wave. Andy, welcome to the Rational Egoist.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
So, Andy, from what I understand, you actually used to be a socialist.
Oh, God, yeah, many years ago.
I know you hate to be reminded, but I kind of have to set up the next question. Now you're a libertarian anarcho-capitalist.
Yeah.
So what brought about the change and when did it happen?
Well, it's a long story. I don't know if your podcast viewers have got the 4 hours necessary, but I'll try and get that down to 1 minute. I grew up, we were quite poor in my family, and I went to these schools and I was very, very clever, precociously clever. And I used to annoy all the teachers by asking them questions all the time. And I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what was wrong, but I knew something was wrong. Why was I clever? Why was I poor? And why were stupid people rich? And I couldn't figure it out. I mean, I'm talking 6, 7 years old, really precocious. And then I went down to my local library. Now, being a state library, I didn't realize that at the time. I went to the children's library, and there was all these books about history, and they were all pro-communist, pro-socialist, because it was a state library. This is in a town called Carlisle in Cumberland in England. Anyway, so I devoured all these history books, which eventually got up to Joseph Stalin and Lenin, all in a very positive light. And I eventually got a pass. I think I was about 10 by this time. I got a pass to get into the adult library because I'd run out of books in the children's section. And then by reading all these books on Lenin and so on, I started reading Das Kapital. Now, I didn't understand it, but I thought I understood it. So there's this precocious 10-year-old in an adult's library. But this is way before the internet. This is back in the 1970s, reading Das Kapital, thinking he understood it. And of course, I don't understand it. And here's the trick. No one does, because it's gibberish. But I thought this precocious 10, 11-year-old thought he understood it and became a communist, because I knew something was wrong in the world. I didn't know what it was. And then this book had the solution. You know, it's because of the rich people creating a state, and then the state that suppresses everybody and keeps the rich rich and keeps all the other people poor. So it's a very, very good answer to my basic problem. There's something wrong, and I couldn't figure out what it was. Anyway, so then just like most socialists, I became an entrenched socialist for the next 20 years until I was over 30 years old. But I had this cognitive dissonance. So I read books like 1984 and Brave New World. And there's a really good book by an American who ended up in the Soviet Union in the 30s called An American in the Gulag. And I read all these books which portrayed this horrible, an Animal Farm as well, that portrayed this horrible vision of socialism and communism. And I couldn't square it. So, to me, communism is the savior of the world. And then I'm reading all these great books which portray socialism to be horrible. And again, cognitive dissonance hit in. So I actually started my own business as well. And when I started my own business, instead of tax being taken away from me at source before I even saw it, I now started having to write out checks to the government for tax with my own IT computer contractor business. And that's when the change began. Because when you write out a check to the HM Inland Revenue for £5,000 and you post it to the Inland Revenue, it makes you think, that's coming out of my bank account. What am I getting for this? And so the ice started melting in my brain, and I stopped. The stupidity which had infected me from 7 years old started melting. That started the process. Anyway, I couldn't stand this cognitive dissonance anymore. So I read this book called Eat the Rich. I don't know how I got to it, but I got to Eat the Rich by P.J. O'Rourke, which was brilliant for me. And then I got to the back of Eat the Rich, and I don't know if any of your viewers have read Eat the Rich, but at the back, I think it's a long time. It's a long time ago since I read that book. I'm about 31, 32 years old at the time. I'm 57 now, so this is some time. What's that? 26 years ago. There's a list of books at the back, and I devoured them one by one. Now, I think one of them was Atlas Shrugged, which you love. It's your
Love it.
book. Yeah, and there was There was others. I don't know how. Oh, it was there. There was F.A. Hayek, Road to Serfdom. And there was a few others. And I read all these, and then they led me on to other books. And somehow I think from Ayn Rand, because once I read all the Ayn Rand novels, I was never a Randian. To me, she's just too communist herself. There's too much centralization and the state and stuff.
Oh my God, we're going to have to discuss that in a few minutes.
Yeah, we'll just park that for a minute until I finish this whopping 4-hour tale in 4 minutes. Yeah, so I've lost my thread. Oh yeah, so somehow I think I read all of Ayn Rand's non-fiction, all the books about being selfish and being a capitalist and all that stuff. And somewhere in there, I discovered Ludwig von Mises and Human Action. So thank you, Ayn Rand. And then I ordered that, and this was ordering this from Mises.org in the United States, and it had to be delivered, and Amazon wasn't going. This was before Amazon. And so Mises.org sent me the book, and it came in a truck with 2 heavily armed guards. It's a massive, great book.
Anyway, and did it have its own dictionary? Like, because when I got my copy, it had Mises Made Easier, its own little dictionary.
No, I'd read Das Kapital as a 10-year-old. I didn't need a dictionary. Anyway.
Sorry.
So there I am. No, precocious. Remember, precocious.
Yes.
It was heavy. I mean, I must say it was a very heavy book. But weirdly, because I'd read Atlas Shrugged, which is an incredibly dense and heavy book, with the 5-hour John Galt speech at the end, I was prepped for heavy reading. So I read it in a weekend, and I literally sat down and I started reading. I had meal breaks and I went to bed, but I basically read the book cover to cover. And as I read it, because I was still a confused communist at the time, the scales just kept pouring off my eyes. And by the end of the book, by the time I turned to the last page, I hadn't understood all of it. It was a bit heavy. I reread it again a bit later where I understood a lot more. By the time I got to the end, I was a convinced Misesian. Nearly all the communism had been wiped out. And I felt like reborn. I felt like Paul on the road to Damascus. Literally, just everything made sense. Mises is a genius. Everything made sense. And then from there, I then got to Rothbard. I then read another book which absolutely cured me, and that's Socialism by Ludwig von Mises. And that absolutely wiped out the last bits. So they completely wiped them away. But you've got to remember, Mises was still a statist, because Mises still believed, he was an army officer in the Austrian army. He believed in the state. He believed in this Hayek as well, another statist. They believe that the state has the right to, the only organization in society that has the right to coerce. It has the right to tax. It has the right to make judgments in a particular territorial area. And both Mises and Hayek both believed that. So I still believed it because I'm still following these great people. Then I got into Rothbard. And then I read Man, Economy and State, again, ordered it from the Mises Institute. Again, it came in a truck. This was even heavier. And if you've got the 2 books, The Human Action and Man, Economy and State are both kind of like twins. But it was much easier to read. Rothbard's a much better writer than Mises, because Mises was he didn't get to America till he was 60.
Well, he was writing in German.
Writing in heavy German, full of Greek and Latin. And then he has to go to English, which is a barbaric, low German, really, full of French and things. So he's writing in English. So he's very intellectual, and he's very heavy, very Germanic. Rothbard is Woody Allen. It's like Woody Allen writing economics. Just jokes, comedy, humor. Just fantastic. Anyway, it just reads so much easier than Mises.
That should have been on the dust cover, the Woody Allen of economics.
So I don't know. He must have lived near Woody Allen. They probably lived within a walking distance of each other. I've actually been. They both
lived in New York, right?
Yeah, I went to Mises's house, which is Upper West Side, and then I walked down. It's only a 10-minute walk to Amsterdam Avenue, where Murray Rothbard used to live. I stood outside his house and took some photos. This was 15, 20 years ago. And then I actually, to keep you happy, I went down to where Ayn Rand used to live as well. There's 2 places I went. The place where she wrote Atlas Shrugged, which is a much smaller building, and then I went to the I think it's Murray Hill, which I always thought was Murray. It should be called Murray Rothbard Hill. I think Murray Hill is where her tower block was when she became the famous Ayn Rand after Atlas Shrugged, and she got lots of money from it. So that was my pilgrimage to New York. Anyway, so convinced Rothbardian. That got me into Hopper, who's like Rothbard's physical presence on Earth is now represented by Hopper. He's the dean of the Austrian school. I'm convinced Austrian, convinced Hoppian, convinced Rothbardian, convinced Misesian, apart from the statist stuff. And then I started going to PFS conference in Bodrum, which is hosted by Professor Hopper. I think I went every year for most years for about 10 years. I probably went about 7 or 8 times in those 10 years. I went last year, might be going this year, might not be, but I'll definitely go next year if I don't go this year. Of course, you meet the professor and you meet lots of Austrian economists. And I've met Jeff Deist and met lots of other great people. And by this point, absolute convinced anarcho-capitalist. So sorry to bore your viewers there with a
Not at all.
with a rambling tale.
You gave me a lot to respond to. It's interesting to me because
I got my 4 hours down to a few minutes. Anyway, you carry on.
All the books you mentioned, well, the vast majority were the ones that brought me into the liberty fold. And what I really found interesting was a good friend of mine who took the pilgrimage to libertarianism or objectivism, whatever you want to call it. He was a socialist when I met him. And he told me the same thing that you just said. He said he always had a sense that something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. And he said he wanted to live in a free society, but he really didn't know what freedom was until he read the books that you mentioned. Now, there's a couple of things you said that I'm going to have to challenge you on.
Oh, okay. Let's do it.
We might have to have an old-fashioned Donnybrook here. I don't know. But you said that Hayek and Mises were statists.
Yeah.
Now, normally, I know what you mean because I'm familiar with these debates. But normally, when people say statist, they're talking about somebody who believes in a total state where the state has total control over the lives, liberty, and property of its citizens. Well, and certainly Mises and Hayek didn't authorize any such thing. They believed in a government in a classical liberal sense. Government.
Well, let's clear up the semantic sense, because being an anarcho-capitalist, because you aren't, but I am. Any trace of the state makes you a statist, even if you only believe in the property office of the state, maintaining property title records. And charging you 10 cents every time you want to view one, or $1 every time you want to change one. So incredibly low cost property office title collect. That is, if you believe in that, you're a statist as far as I'm concerned. But other people might call Mises and Hayek minarchists or minarchists. The absolute smallest state you can possibly get away with, but it's still necessary. Whereas to me, being a kind of Molinarian or a Bruce Bensonian or a Rothbardian or a Hoppian, I don't believe the state is necessary for anything. And I believe in a totally voluntary society. We should live in a totally voluntary society where we all agree to everything. If we don't agree to it, then we're on our own and we have to do something about it, but we can't be forced to do anything by anybody.
There's an interesting,
so they're minarchists.
There's an interesting anecdote that I love, and you just reminded me of it by calling Mises a statist. I'm reminded of Mises announcing to the Mount Pelerin Society that they were all a bunch of socialists.
Yeah, you're all a bunch of socialists.
Yeah. So you said there's two other things. One, the Hoppe thing, but I want to go back to the Rand thing. You made a statement about Rand, and you said she was communistic herself. How do you figure that?
Well, it's a cult. To me, Randianism is a cult, and everyone turns to her for guidance. You shouldn't need to. You shouldn't need her to be the one who defines everything. It should.
But does her philosophy? But does her philosophy? See, this is a problem I have, because I have, since I've been out of prison, come across people that seem to cite Rand. By no means all objectivists do this, but I have come across some who cite Rand as if she's Moses with the 10 Commandments, not to be questioned. But her philosophy isn't that. That's what happens among some people who try to follow it. But to say that Rand herself was not an individualist, that's where I take exception. Like, I can't, if you could point to one sentence in the plethora of books and articles she's written where she wanted to be taken on faith, I'd be very shocked.
Well, there's one thing. It's not. See, I'm not a philosopher. I live in the real world.
Oh,
I mean,
come
I know the
on.
dollars.
You are
No,
you're
no,
kind
no.
of a philosopher.
No,
Working
I
in,
know the dollars. I know the dollar's going to nothing. Okay, I
yeah.
know it's going to go to
You
nothing at
worked
some
in the
point. I don't.
you're an expert in the derivatives market. Come on, you can
Yeah, yeah.
handle some
I know
philosophy.
the dollar is going to nothing. It's going to be worthless sometime, and that sometime is not that far away. I don't know when. Just like all Austrian economists, it's within 100 years. It's going to be worth, to my opinion, it's going to be worth nothing. But I still hold most of my cash in dollars. Why? Because it's the least bad piece of laundry in the washing bag. It's the least bad fiat currency. It will be the last one to go down. The rest will go down before it, and then it will go down. So I'm more of a realist than a deep philosophical person. But if talking about Rand, you got to remember, I'm a confused socialist who's needing a cure.
Yeah.
And I find the cure. And what's the cure? The cure is Atlas Shrugged, which I'm reading. I even read through the whole John Galt 4-hour speech in one go. I did wonder why. See, my problem with Atlas Shrugged is she gave up just before it became interesting. Because what I wanted to know is when John Galt and his friends land in Washington at the end of the book, which I seem to recall, and then they're about to take over America, I wanted to know what happened next. And this is where Rand started failing me, because she never, ever explained what would happen. She never explained what a just government is. She never explained how John Galt would run the government. She never explained what America would be like 10 years after John Galt and his friends were in charge. And I wanted to see that, and she never wrote it. It's a bit like Karl Marx with not writing the end of
Have you ever
Das
read
Kapital.
her essay on the nature of government, or her essay on man's
Yeah,
rights?
yeah. And I
Or
want
the
to
essay
debate
on what is
that with
well,
you.
in all of those, she talk and what is capitalism. She discusses what a just government would look like. And she
Yeah.
even in Atlas Shrugged, she talked about at the end of the book the amendments that would have to be given to the United States Constitution to make it a just government. She talked about
Yeah.
the flaws that were embedded it from the get-go and what would be needed to fix it. And she actually does fix it in Atlas Shrugged. But then she wrote essays afterwards.
But this is where I think you can't fix it, because I hadn't got to the point I was trying to get to. And the
Oh,
point I was
sorry.
trying to get to is, so I'm curing. I'm grateful. She helped me get to the further points. She helped me break the logjam, and she cured me from most of socialism. And I got to one of her nonfiction books, though. And she started the two things. I'll just mention one of them quickly. She's praising the Apollo program. And I'm kind of going, hang on, this is taxpayers' money that's being taken from people against their will to build these rockets. But she's praising it because it's defending America from the communists. But the more important point was, there was this, I can't remember the exact passage, because at this point I was starting to give up on her, where she's describing how there's a crime being committed, and one person runs to one policeman in a free anarcho-capitalist society, and another person runs to a different policeman in a different anarcho-capitalist society. And because they're both in different anarcho-capitalist society, justice fails, because you need one overarching authority to make the final decision. And that's where she lost me at that point there. I can't remember it exactly. And because I gave up on her, it's kind of faded from my brain what those details were. But she wants one state. So if we live somewhere, let's say we live here in Gibraltar, where I am,
Yes.
there should be a state, a just state, possibly.
Yes.
But you have to have a state. Whereas when I started reading Hopper and Molinari and Benson, and they start talking, well, let's give the Hopper kind of picture. The Hopper picture is there are lots of private insurance aid. It's a bit like Snow Crash. In Snow Crash, the book by Neil Stevenson, you can pay for the insurance services of your favorite insurance company, like Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong or whatever. So you can be in a federal part of the United States, but you don't fall under the federal United States government, because you've got a badge that says Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong, and you're paying money to that insurance company. But in Hopper's more kind of serious version of that, if me and you met somewhere and we had a fight, oh, you spilled my drink, okay? So I'm holding a coffee, and then you knock it and I spill it, and we have to arbitrate who's going to pay for it. You would have one insurance company, and I would have an insurance company that we both pay for. We could not be insured. We'd be kind of outlaws, but we'd be insured. And then those insurance companies would sort it out, and then they'd go to arbitration to a private adjudicating judge, just like maritime law does. All through the world now, because if I'm from Liberia and you're from Panama and we crash in the middle of the Atlantic, what do? Well, we go to the maritime court and do the same thing. And then they appoint an adjudicator, and then we both agree to settle on whatever the adjudicator says in a private legal system. The entire maritime legal law code for the entire world now is stateless. And so I'm very much into this stateless thing about law. Bruce Benson's book, The Private Enterprise of Law, is the best. I'm not very good at describing things, but if anyone's interested in this,
oh, you're great. Come on.
Bruce Benson
stop with the typical British self-deprecation. You're great.
Anyway, so that's where Rand lost me. When she said there has to be an overarching authority to decide legal matters. Even in, let's say, Gibraltar's ruled by Ayn Rand's cloned gene pool person, and they're running an entirely just government. I don't think there could be any just government in the world that charges a single penny in tax. Tax is theft. You take a single penny of tax as a government against someone's will, and you're not just anymore. You are an illegal mafia gang running a protection racket. Yeah. So maybe this is what a Hoppian government would look like. Gibraltar would be, let's do an island in the Pacific. So somebody creates an island in the Pacific using their own money, and they call it Hopper Island, and they own Hopper Island, and they build buildings on it and swimming pools and nice places, and people go there. Well, who would be the ruler there? It would be the owner of Hopper Island, and I'd be perfectly okay with that. And I'd go there, and I would have to follow the rules of whoever owned the island. And if I did something wrong, let's say I dyed my hair orange, and the rule said anyone with orange hair will be deported, I would have to accept it because that's what the rules say when I signed the contract on the property. So I think that's why we all believe in secession, all of us kind of anarcho-capitalists, because we want to break the world down to the point where the states are all so small, Europe of 1,000 Liechtensteins, that they have so little power because they ever try to push us around, we just leave. So if I'm in one city in Germany and they try to put the taxes up too much, we just leave and go somewhere else. They're very, very weak. And at that point, we then start having many, many more private cities and very many more private properties. And then we end up in Ancapistan. We end up on the hallowed utopian road of Ancapistan. But that's obviously that's a long way in the future. But we just want the state to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and to the point where it's almost meaningless. Of course, the states themselves want to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where
get no argument from
we can't escape them. We can't escape them. Yeah. A global state. We can't escape it.
Yeah, there's a few things that you said. You said that taxation is theft, and if a government is taking 1 cent of money from you by force, it's an unjust government. I agree with that. Rand would certainly agree with it. In the essay you referenced, I believe you're talking about Apollo versus Dionysus, or Apollo and Dionysus. I can't remember what book it's in. I can't
quite remember.
But she was praising the achievement of man's mind in being able to go to the moon. She said specifically that the government doing it is not a good thing. She just was a very big admirer of the capacity for human beings to achieve things. And as far as there being one overarching state, because I believe it was in Power and Market, and Murray Rothbard was discussing the basic system that you're talking about. And even he conceded that there would have to be one final authority in a judiciary to decide legal things, because ultimately you need an end to this stuff. You can't just go on forever. So in that kind of, when I read that, I thought, okay, well, he's just given up the game. Now, as far as this is something that I just saw in an interview recently where Jan Helfeld was interviewing Jeffrey Tucker. And he posed a question to him about anarcho-capitalism. And what he said was, suppose you have an 18-year-old guy and he's dating a 15-year-old girl. And the protection agency that he signed up for says this is perfectly okay. You can date her, you can have sex with her, you can marry her, whatever you want. But the protection agency that she signed up for says it's illegal. You can't do that. So now her parents want to press charges against him. How do you resolve that? What he's done in his mind and according to the rules that he's going by is perfectly legitimate. but according to her parents and their legal entity, it's not. And the problem arises because they're both governing in the same jurisdiction. So it's not as if you can, once you go from Connecticut to Massachusetts, the law changes. Here you have different laws governing the same place. So how do you resolve that?
Well, I'm not Professor Walter Block, who would be able to give you an answer there, a perfectly good anarcho-capitalist answer. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not an academic. I don't study these things all day long. I just work in markets and coding and stuff. How would you decide? Well, if I was in charge of Hopper Island, if I owned Hopper Island and they both lived on Hopper Island, he'd be off the island. Well, he'd be off
he'd be voted out.
He would be raping a 15-year-old girl. That's disgusting.
Wait a second. They're boyfriend and girlfriend.
Right. Okay. How would you settle it then from a legalistic dispute? Well, maybe the Hopper Island thing would say you've got to use the Hopper Island insurance, but let's not go there. Let's say they do have two insurance companies looking after them, and that's allowable on Hopper Island. Well, that would go to an arbitration board, and then maybe it would go to another arbitration board because that arbitration panel can't decide it. And you probably would end up with one person in the world who is deciding everything. And this happens in the Bible, I think. I think is it in King? No, it's not in Kings. It's somewhere in the Bible before Kings of Israel, in Judges. That's it, Judges. There is one guy in Israel who is that guy. I think was it Samuel? I can't remember. There's some guy in Judges who's the guy. And he's the lead, but he's not a monopolist. You don't have to use him. There's several guys who'd like to be him, but everyone goes to that guy because he's the one everyone trusts. But it's not monopoly. That's the key point. It's not a coercive monopoly. You don't have to go to him, but everyone goes to him because he's the one it's like imagine football. And you need a World Cup referee, and there's the best referee in the world, and everyone agrees this guy is the best referee in the world. You could go to 1, 3, or 4 referees, but everybody's happy if you get this one guy. He's the best referee in the world. And again, go to the Bible. I think it's Samuel, somewhere in Judges, and they come to Samuel. They say, right, you're the guy who knows everything. Should we have a king? And he says, no, because a king is a monopolist and a coercive person. He will be the one who makes all the judgments, and he will force you to pay him to make all the judgments. But I think Samuel, I can't remember, sorry if I got the names wrong. He says, no, don't have a king, because the king's going to start taxing you. He's going to take 1/10 of your property. He's going to take 1/10 of your money. He's going to take 1/10 of your mules. He's going to take 1/10 of your sons, 1/10 of your daughters. And these days, of course, it's more like 50, 60% with the amount of tax that governments take. And then they inflate on top of that to steal even more by the back door. It's more like 70%. So they're complaining about 10% back then. Don't have a king, don't have a king. And then the Israelites say, no, we want a king, we want the king. Everyone else has got a king, we want one. And so he says, no, you're going to regret this. And we are regretting it. So they appoint a king of Israel. And then obviously what happens is all states always end up having war, because any king can take tax from people. It's not his money. And then use that money to build an army, and then conquer another kingdom, and then take tax from that kingdom. So he's got like double the amount of revenue now, and it didn't cost him a penny. So all states are always in the process of fomenting war. We even see it with the United States. Looks like the super libertarian place 250 years ago, but they've ended up having this empire, and they've now got troops in virtually every country in the world. They've got Space Corps trying to control space. They'll probably be fighting with the Chinese for the moon and Mars. States are always ending up fighting each other to gain more resources. They all ultimately want to end up being one world state, which is impossible to escape, like a global mafia. It's impossible to get away from. I think even that will fail. I think who wrote a book on that? That was Henry Hazlitt, and The World Will Turn Back, or something. There's some book like that. A novel by Henry Hazlitt. It's great, and he describes how there is a one world horrible totalitarian government, and eventually even they go back to the free market because everything collapses. So I've lost my thread. What was I talking about? Yeah, so how do you decide it? You do end up with one guy. So all the insurance companies all pyramid up to one, but he's not coercive and he's not a monopolist. This guy can be a woman as well.
Doesn't he? Well, the guy can't be a woman, right? You mean the position can be held by?
No, guy can be. If I walk into a lecture theatre and there's 2,000 people there, 1,000 men, 1,000 women, I can say, hi, guys. Guy's a really interesting word because it does come from a guy of Guy Fawkes, the guy who did Bonfire Night.
Really?
It comes from him. Yeah, really.
I didn't know that.
Kids in England used to make a fake man every year to burn on a fire, and so give a penny for the guy. And it was a faceless body, like a mannequin, and they would go on top of a bonfire every year in England and get burned. Now, this tradition went to America. So even the Americans were celebrating Bonfire Night as well. And then once you had your pesky revolution, you kind of forgot about all your old English traditions, but you still had the guy. So Guy Fawkes, who was responsible for
The
trying to
gunpowder
blow up
plot.
Parliament. Do you know, when I grew up, when I was a boy in England, I thought we had Bonfire Night to celebrate him trying to blow up. I didn't realize we were celebrating him because he was caught trying to blow up Parliament. I thought it was because he tried to blow up Parliament.
It's too bad he was doing it for religious purposes, though, right? Like if it was just he's going after the government, you could, like a John Lilburn, you could probably get behind him.
Yeah. Another interesting thing about Guy is that in English we have the word you. Now, we used to have the for the singular and you for the plural, and then we started using you for the singular, and then it became very confusing which you meant when you said you. So lots of different people speaking English have adopted different ways of adding a plural you. People in the south of the United States say y'all, which means all of you. I think in mafiosi films, they say use, and that's plural. And also in normal American English, you guys means.
I think you might be getting us in a lot of trouble with a lot of different groups here. I mean, we're very woke over here in America.
Probably. Oh, well, that's why we've had so many problems in the world. Anyway, so there would be a guy or a gal, it doesn't matter, a person who would ultimately be Samuel from the Bible. They would be the top judge, but it would not be monopolistic and it would not be coercive. And if ever we started detecting that he was being biased in his judge or her judgments, then we'd hire someone else and we wouldn't be forced to keep using him or his sons.
So that's the way that it wouldn't be monopolistic, because you could get rid of them. But
you could say we're not using you anymore.
Yeah, but if it's not, I don't want to use the word coercive because you're only going before him to settle your disputes. But if you don't have that one person, and if you have him and I say, well, this isn't coercive, so I'm not going to him, then you end up with the same problem. You ultimately need somebody who has authority. That's
you would have to change your insurance company. And if an insurance company arose, you started an insurance company and you said, we're not using that guy, we're going to use this gal over here instead. Then if everyone thought she was better than him, then everyone would start going to your new insurance company. Your old insurance company would start losing all of its business, because it can, remember, it's not coercive, it's not a government, it can't force you to pay them for the protection services like governments can. They'd start losing a lot of business, and then they might change from him to her as well. So it would be through your insurance companies making free decisions to move the top person, the top arbitrator.
Well, Andy, if I'm accused of a crime, now, I spent 25 years in prison, right? So suppose I commit the crimes I committed, and I just simply refuse to be held accountable by any of your agencies. I say, no, I'm not going to consent to go before this judge. I'm not going to consent to go before that judge. And I don't care how high up the chain you go, I'm not going to consent. Don't at some point you have to use retaliatory force to get me? And
well, no, because I think how this works. No, you don't. I think how this works with Bruce Benson. Bruce Benson could please. Can't quite remember, but what I recall, do read the book for the definitive version, and in Hopper as well. If you don't want to use insurance companies, which are all in this mutual global collective pact of agreeing and having, just like maritime law, having all arbitration services, Hanseatic law, there's been loads of free market legal systems. In fact, in America now, I think more legal decisions are made in the free market than are made by the useless, slow, expensive state.
You still have to abide by these laws, right? All these laws.
Yeah, but they're only... But most courts in the world now, the state ones, are so slow, so cumbersome, so expensive under monopoly theory. That's how they all end up. That many people now are just paying private adjudicators. Even if the private adjudicators come up with a decision which goes against them, they still accept it because it's done in 3 months or 3 weeks rather than 3 years or 10 years.
We don't have that in criminal law, though.
Oh, yeah. So I've still not made my point yet. So the point is, you refuse to accept any of these insurance companies. You are now what in the old West they would call an outlaw. because you don't have any legal protection. So if somebody's family or some group of guys and gals and whoever go after you with guns to kill you, no one's going to look after you. You are on your own. Now, you might have a big arsenal yourself and there will be a gunfight, but you are an outlaw. And this is the old English concept from back in the Dark Ages when we lived in Germany. They did have outlaws. If you didn't accept the rule of the thing, which was the court, the tribal. I mean, a king was just the leader of kin. It was, and it was freely elected as well, just like the kings in later German states were chosen. Each time the king died, a new king was chosen, not just necessarily the son of the dead king. If you refuse to accept the rulership, the laws of the thing, you had to go off into the woods and hide, because if you didn't do that, an aggrieved group of people would come after you and kill you, and no one did anything because you were an outlaw. And I think that's what would happen if you refuse to take this arbitration. Fine, you could live normally and live a perfectly peaceful life and save $50 a month by not having any insurance for protection. But if anyone charges you in an insurance court of law, they will win. And if you don't like it, you're going to have to disappear, because people are going to come around to your flat and start taking stuff, or kill you because you're an outlaw.
Or I can kill them too.
But then what do you think the insurance company is going to do if you start killing its members?
Well, we have rather large gangs over here in America, and it's interesting to me because the situation that you just described is very similar to what Rand says will happen in those types of scenarios. Well, we're getting close.
Can I just?
You can. I don't want to get the last word. I'll give you the last word.
A long time ago, I used to be in the British Army, and I'm signing up with SAS Insurance Limited. Don't come after me, otherwise you'll be in a whole heap of trouble.
Okay, before we go, I just want to ask you. Now, you've been in the liberty movement for quite some time now. So, do you think it's made any progress, and where do you think it is now?
It's nowhere near as good as it was in the UK 30 years ago. It's 30 years ago in the UK, you had Margaret Thatcher. Now, she's a statist, and she wrote a book called Statecraft, and taxes under her and regulations under her actually went up from the beginning of her rule to the end of her rule. But libertarians in the UK kind of hung on to her because she got rid of a lot of government entities, got rid of a lot of government monopolies, privatized, which is great. Didn't do fantastic privatizations, didn't do it very well, but at least she got the state out of many, many, many enterprises and made everybody in the UK wealthier and happier and less taxation and direct taxation anyway. And with her, there was a whole group of people. They were led by a guy called Sir Keith Joseph. There was another guy called Norman Tebbit. And there was a whole raft of conservative MPs, maybe 30, 40, 50, who formed the Thatcherite core. And they were pretty much libertarians, very, very strongly libertarians. But gradually, with Tony Blair and the Labour Party reacting to that from Marxism today, I used to be a Marxist. I supported this. They were all Marxists, all those people like Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and how are we going to beat Margaret Thatcher? So they formed this magazine called Marxism Today, and that gave them all of their intellectual ideas, which then drove them to become New Labour, and then they took over the UK. The Conservative Party itself reacted to that, especially after the death of Margaret Thatcher and the retirement of all of her colleagues, her libertarian-ish colleagues, by becoming just like Tony Blair. So now we have a technocratic state. Whether you're conservative or liberal or Labour or whatever, it makes no difference. They're all exactly this. They're all dancing on the head of a pin. They're all totalitarians, all of them. And even Boris Johnson, who was our great hope when he became prime minister, even he's banning gas boilers to save the earth, banning in 10 years time or so gasoline cars to save the earth. He's just as totalitarian as the rest, and he's the most libertarian one. So the whole of politics in the UK are terrible. And under Tony Blair, another reason it's bad, apart from the death of all these old libertarian-ish Tory MPs, the rules in the UK now on hate speech are such that I have to constantly self-censor as I'm speaking to you. Because I could say, and I may have said today, things which the police would pick me up for in the UK and say, you've broken the law. Yeah. So people in the UK now, libertarians, are scared and are constantly self-censoring. So even if they don't get arrested, there's things they just can't say. And even if it's not illegal yet through hate speech laws, so there's no free speech in the UK now, you can lose your job. You can lose your friends. Let's say I said something terrible that the wokest brigade in the UK hated, but wasn't illegal. And the police saw it and said, what he said is not illegal yet, so we're going to leave him alone. The woke brigade wouldn't stop there. They would hound anyone who employed me, hound anyone who gave me contracts, and I would cease getting any work. And this has actually happened to me. I posted something once on a Facebook page to my friends only, which was about freedom of speech. This offended one of my Facebook friends, who sent it to an agency who used to employ me and said, you can't employ him. He's terrible. Look at this thing that I found on his friends only Facebook page. That agency then stopped using me. I didn't know anything about this. This stream of work from this company, which had gone on for years, just dried up. And I couldn't figure it out what was going on. And then this guy, oh, by the way, he started getting the contracts I would have got because I was better than he was at our job, our mutual job, according to all the metrics that we're measured by. So he started picking up lots of the work that I would have got, and I didn't even know why I wasn't getting it anymore. So he was winning both ways. He got very drunk one night and told somebody who knew me, who told me what had happened. So through this little swine, who I despise, I've lost hundreds of thousands of pounds of work that as I was losing it and having to move to other areas to make up my income, I didn't know what was going on. And there's people in this company that have done this to me, and they keep it secret between themselves. So like the managing director and the chairman of the company don't know about this. I just stopped getting contracts because certain key people within the organization just pulled my name off lists. Even if they see this video now, and I do get various other things from various other people, that might go as well. I don't care anymore because I'll do other things to get around it. But this fear of losing your income and losing your job, even if what you say isn't illegal, stops people saying or doing anything. I've even had a former colleague of mine who was a senior libertarian in the UK, very well known, ask me to drop and pull and delete videos me interviewing him, speaking to him, because he doesn't want those videos from years ago to affect his job prospects, because Britain is now a terrible, terrible place. There's no free speech left in Britain. And sometimes you do cross this line, this hate speech law line that Tony Blair brought in, and you will be arrested and you will be fined and you could go to jail for just saying some words out of your mouth. It's horrible. So liberty in the UK there's very few libertarians left who are prepared to say anything. And even what they say, they're constantly, and I'm doing this right now, you're constantly self-censoring. You constantly think, can I say that? And then you're thinking, maybe I'm straying close to some edge there, so I can't say it. And of course, once you've done that, once you've limited free speech, the totalitarians have won. So you've just got to do what we can. This is why I believe in America. This is why I said to you the other day, I believe in America. I think America is the only hope in the world for liberty. Because it's the only place, and not even in all of America. I think if you were in Chicago or New York or Los Angeles or especially San Francisco, the woke brigade would get you too if you said certain things, but you're probably still okay in all the red states, Texas, Florida.
That's why we have to fight them with everything we got. Well, Andy, thank you so much for being here. We're out of time. Where can people find you?
If you go to libertarianism.uk, that's our main blog site. And if you go to /podcasts, you'll be able to see our podcast there with me interviewing fantastic people like Michael here and a few other people. I'm going to be speaking to Jeff Dice soon, which is going to be fun. And it's just a hobby for me, really. I just like speaking to interesting people. And I'm just going to do one a week or one a fortnight or one a month, however I'm feeling, and for the rest of time. And I may go to jail because or lose all my work and live on a crust, but I'm going to do it for fun. But yeah, libertarianism.uk. It's called the Free Life Blog. And if you go to /podcasts, you'll see all of our podcasts there.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us on The Rational Egoist. Until next time, I'm Michael Liebowitz.